Hey, welcome back to another episode of The One Row. My name is David. Welcome. If it's your first time, shout yourself out. If you are a long time, come hang out, whatever. It's all good. We just had a Patreon only live stream, had some good times there. We're going to continue having fun here. Today, we're talking about bug out locations and finding a bug out location. And we're going to, so first of all, my wife's not here tonight. As you can probably tell, I'm solo. Feeling a little under the weather, so she will participate another night. We got Mandolin on, VA Prepper. How you doing? Matt Henricks on, Big Vic's backyard. Big Vic, how you doing, man? Dark Brew, how are you doing? Utah Mike, how is it going? So, all right, Matt, welcome. SU Duck, need to be able to bury food and dig a tunnel there. Don't disagree with you. Now, what's up, Christian Wahika? How you doing? Yeah, she's fine. She's just, she's feeling a teeny bit, little drained. It's probably the best word for it. You need to take the night off. So totally support that. All right. So, okay, tonight we're going through how to pick a bug out location. So I'm going to try to stay somewhat on point. I do want to interact with y'all, and I would love, the conversation. So definitely keep the chat going. But, I do have stuff I'm wanting to hit on. So when we talk about bugging out, obviously, well, maybe not so obviously, but bugging out is the last resort, in my opinion. I know there are some people who say, no, you want to stay mobile, and there's these advantages by being mobile. I struggle with that concept, and here's why. If you're at home, you potentially have neighbors, you have a network, you know the area, you can prepare in advance a lot of redundant systems. So, for example, I have water stored, I have water filtration capabilities, I have, ways of getting water nearby very easily, lots of water, for example. And so you can, just by the nature of preparing in your own home, make your home much, much more prepared for a long-term scenario before you'd have to bug out. However, there are some times when you do have to bug out. A hurricane's coming, roving horde, zombie breakout, whatever it is. There's reasons why you might have to not break out, but to leave your bug-in location. Leave your home. Yeah, Utah Mike says, I do not have a planned bug out location. Yeah. And that's what this is about, is figuring out one. Because if you do it now, while you have access to the internet, while you have access to a vehicle to scout it out, to plan. SU DAC says, gotta bury your supply of food there at night, leaving no sign showing. So, can you legitimately bury a year's supply of food there? That's going to be tricky. But you can stash some things, some food, some water, stash some weapons, stash some supplies in some of these places, bury them. You can make little PVC canisters and bury those suckers with all kinds of stuff. Yeah, staying in place is the first plan. Prepare your home, prepare everything you can at home, but just recognize that you may have to get mobile, you may have to go. And again, it's a last resort. Now, for a few situations, though, bugging out, there's three different ways I look at bugging out. The first is that you're going to bug out to somebody's property. So say you live in the city, or you're living at your house or your condo apartment. Something's going to go down. There's some kind of a situation of some kind, and you're going to then evac to someone's place. The family member, friends that are expecting you to come, that live in a better location than you do. Maybe it's in the country, maybe it's a ranch, maybe it's in a suburban neighborhood, but at least it's not in downtown DC. It's out, in a little bit more of a rural area. So that's the first situation of bugging out. That's something you might do very, very early, right? So if there's some kind of a thing, SHTF type scenario, and you are in downtown Washington, D.C. or downtown New York, at the first sign of trouble, you may bug out to that place. But again, it's to somebody's place. Now, the second type of bugging out is bugging out from your house or your primary residence to some kind of secondary property. So maybe you have the money to buy some land. Maybe you have a property. Maybe you have some land with a little bit of shelter, a cabin, a mobile home trailer, or something, right? You've got a property with place, and it's your own. So maybe your primary plan is to bug in to your regular home, but you'll go out to that cabin if you need to. Or maybe that the first sign of trouble, you're going to then bug out to the mountains where you have your cabin. Okay, that's the second type of bugging out. So first is bugging out to somebody else's place. Second one is bugging out to your own place, whether it's just land or whether it's a land plus shelter plus, all kinds of stuff you can put there. The third one is what I call bugging out as a last resort. And this is where you are, for me, this is my primary bug in place, is my home. This is where I'm going to stay until I'm forced out. Now, maybe I'm forced out because, run out of food, run out of supplies. This particular area where I live, maybe it becomes unsafe to stay. Maybe there's roving gangs and civil unrest. Maybe my house burns down. Somehow everything burns down. I'm left with nothing. Maybe I just choose to stay here because I still at least have the property. Or maybe it's at that point, maybe it's just time to go. But whatever it is, it's what I call bugging out as a last resort. So what this live stream, what I want to really focus on is bugging out as a last resort. So finding a place where you can go in the case that you have to, or you're forced out, right? You're forced out. All right. Let's see. All right. So, okay. So if your plan is number 1 or 2 when you're bugging out, right, which is as soon as something bad happens, you're going to go to your friend's house, you're off property, great. But if you don't have that as an option, all of us need to take the time to try to come up with a bug out location in case as a last resort. Okay. So first of all, in doing this, there's a lot of tools that can help you do this. You can use Zillow to understand property ownership. You can use Google Maps for navigation, route planning, terrain, stuff like that. There's an app called OnX Hunt. There's other hunting apps where you can see where, like, you have private property versus public land, et cetera, et cetera. But really, we're focusing on the third scenario, which is bugging out as a last resort. Although a lot of the same principles apply in picking a location, even if you're going to buy that property. So maybe you're actually looking at buying a couple acres. You can buy land in some places for $1,000 an acre, right? But the question is can you actually get there in an SHTF situation? So that's what we're going to focus on, is picking where to go to. So one of the key things that you want to think about, figure out, etc., is how far can I go on about 3/4 of a tank of gas? Now, why 3/4 of a tank of gas? Well, and I should say 3/4 of a tank of gas in whatever vehicle you're bugging out in, or if you're a part of a caravan, 3/4 tank of gas of the shortest distance of all the vehicles, and they have a certain size gas tank and a certain miles per gallon fuel usage. So 3/4 essentially tank of gas driving distance for the vehicle they can go the least distance, right? Because you don't want to get 80% of the way there and have to start ditching vehicles, right? Because one won't make it. So you have to figure it out, whichever is the least far traveling vehicle. Now, why 3/4 tank of gas? One is during a situation of some kind, the chances of hitting a gas station and being able to gas up are very, very low. Even if the pumps are working, which is questionable, are the payment processing systems going to work? Is it going to be cash only? Are you wanting to wait in lines around a gas station during a situation like this, right? It's like going to a Walmart during an SHTF situation. You just don't want to be there. Gas stations are going to be the same way. So second, you may say, okay, well, my car can go so far, and then I've got 20 extra gallons of fuel I'll put in the back. Well, that's great, but are you going to actually be able to pull over the side of the road somewhere? And are you going to want to pull over at the side of the road and fill up that thing? You're going to have to stop, which is a risky proposition. Then you have to set up a perimeter. You have to have people on overwatch, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not ideal, right? And so yeah, you have to consider that. Then I do recommend that everybody in their storage, in their preparedness at their primary bug in their home before they bug out, that they store enough gas to fill their tank. I know a lot of us will try to fill their tank, fill their gas tank up when we get to half tank. And that's great. But, some of us get down to E or get to the gas light turning on before we fill up. So always try to store at least one gas tank's worth of fuel in your house. You can get 5-gallon gas canisters for, I don't know, $20 each. So if you get 4 of those for about $100 and then fill them and then use the fuel stabilizer, et cetera, that helps. Appreciate that, man. And yeah, Jamie's out tonight. She is taking the night off, and she will be back next week. Appreciate that for those smashing that like button. What's up, Ditch Doc? How you doing, man? So, but why 3/4 and not a full tank? The reason is because during a situation, your primary travel route may not work. You may say, okay, well, I'm going to be able to do this route, but when it comes down to it, maybe there's road closures, maybe there's, flooding, maybe the certain areas are blocked off by the police or National Guard or something like that. So that extra quarter tank is to allow you to reroute, and it's allowed if there's traffic, et cetera, et cetera. So that quarter is that buffer. That quarter tank is a buffer to help you finish getting there. So for me in my situation, so let me share a screen real quick. In my situation, okay. All right, here's a map. Let me see if it came up okay. Yes, okay. So here is, I don't live in Manassas, but not far from Manassas, right? So here's Washington, D.C. I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in here. So here's Washington, D.C. Here's the suburbs. And then further out, you get into this area out in here. And this is where we live, is out this way. I just said Manassas, but we don't actually live in Manassas. So if I'm bugging out, my main vehicle is my Tahoe, but I also have a Jeep Wrangler, a Ford Wrangler. And if I'm going to bug out, we're going to actually bug out with both vehicles. And the Tahoe has a much farther driving distance on one tank of gas than the Wrangler. So I would use that 3/4 driving distance of the Wrangler, which, if it's fully topped off my Wrangler with the lifted and it's not super fuel efficient, can get about 180 miles, 190 miles driving distance. Excuse me. It was 100. Sorry, I did the math. It was 190 to 220 miles on a tank, on 3/4 tank of gas, right? So I just plugged in some stuff into Google Maps. And so if I wanted to go all the way out here into West Virginia, I could get up in this area here of West Virginia, which would be, I can't read that from here. What did I say? Elkins, West Virginia. But if I'm looking for a bug out location, if I take this as the axis of an arc, or the center point of my arc, and this is the thing, basically, and just draw, if you can see my mouse cursor, just draw a fictitious line around here, right? And that gives me a rough distance of options of places where I could go on 3/4 tank of gas. So if I'm going to pick a bug out location, I want to be somewhere in this area, right through here. Okay. Now let me keep going. Let me stop sharing the screen for just a second. So that's where I'm at now, that's what would be reasonable, right? Now, other things that you want to consider, and I know this is not ideal, and it would be hard for many of us to do this, but is it possible when you're picking a bug out location, is it possible to walk there? that's not your first choice, right? But what if cars aren't working, right? There's some kind of crazy EMP and blah, 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 or maybe there's no more gas or something. I don't know. But is it possible to walk there or to bicycle there, hike there, take a bicycle, something like that? Is it even possible? This isn't a primary consideration. It's, to me, more important to get further away from the cities and population centers than it is to be walkable, right? So, and by walkable, I mean within reasonable time. So if I'm on the road on foot for 5-6 days, okay, that's hard, but we could do it. And that would get me, 5-6 days, 20 miles a day. That would get me pretty close to 3/4 of a tank of gas, maybe 6-7 days. So yeah, but you would want to have that something to think about at least. Then in general, you want to be as far from population centers as possible. So let me bring this back up. Now you can see here that population center wise around there's DC, right? Washington, DC, which is a huge population center. Oops. And then down from there, you have Richmond, right down here. And then over here, you have Harrisonburg and Staunton area off in here, and Charlottesville right in, here, which is where the University of Virginia is. Now, those are smaller population centers, but really once you head west from the DC suburbs, which are about Manassas and et cetera, once you get that far out, there's a lot of places that don't have a lot of population. As you can see, there's a lot of just greenery with very little roads. Because essentially what we have here is we have the Shenandoah mountain range here, kind of running southwest to northeast. It's where the Appalachian Trail goes through. And then there's another line of mountains over here on the other side of Interstate 81, which is the Monongahela National Forest. And what is it called? Not George Washington National Forest, but I can't remember what it's called. But there's another line of mountains, and then there's this Shenandoah Valley between it you may have heard of, okay? So, but you want to get away from those population centers as much as possible, right? So, then another thing to consider is you don't want to plan on using somebody else's property. So as you're looking at locations, you may be like, oh, this place looks empty. But if it's actually owned by someone, particularly an individual, bugging out onto their property is really, really risky because if they choose to defend their property, then you now have potential gunfight. Secondly, that's not really a cool move if it's actually owned by somebody. And then for that to be a successful bug out location for you and your people, there's going to be a lot of luck involved, right? Because you can't really go practice there. You can't study the area very well. It's like one thing I'm going to tell you toward the end of this is once you have a place picked out, you need to go spend time there. You need to drive there. You need to walk there. You need to camp there. You need to do as much as you can to be around that area. As we talked about earlier, you might want to even stash stuff there if that's going to be your location. So another thing that you want to consider is where other people are fleeing population centers, where they're going to go. Okay. So here back on the map, sorry, I'm trying to follow comments at the same time. So Ditch Doc says you can set up pace planes, evac routes, and everything on there first time. Oh, I've never heard of that. What's it called? I'm not scrolling. Why is it not scrolling? I just found Mad Gear today helps create emergency plans. Oh, that's cool. Thank you, Ditch Dog. I'll have to check that one out. I have not seen that. Mad Gear. Very cool. Matt says, for me, bug out location needs are high ground. We're going to talk about that one. Single mainline entry exit. We're going to talk about a little bit about that. Water source. That's absolutely central. Being away from civilization. Outskirts Homestead 44 says, I understand that pop centers could pose a threat, but if you are in a suburb rural, you will likely be fine. If your plan is to bug in, we will most people So will most people. Normalcy bias is real. 100%. Yeah. No, I appreciate that comment. Yeah. The center core of this concept is of preparedness, in my opinion. Bugging in is the absolute number one thing you want to do, is bug in. The only time you want to bug out is when you have to bug out. So this live stream is really focused on coming up with a plan of where to bug out to when you have to. Again, it's the last resort in my book. I'm not leaving my house until I absolutely have to, because I have my preps here. We're comfortable here. Again, normalcy bias is real, right? Very, very true. Mad Gear paper and app, checklist and everything. That's cool. I'll have to check that out. That's really cool. It's free too. That's awesome. Very, very cool. Okay. So, but when we look at population centers and where they might flee, right? So if most of us on the East Coast, right, we have an ocean on one side of the thing. So heading toward the ocean, particularly where we are, is just not a great idea, because there's not much land between the cities and ocean. So it's going to be pretty populated. So most people are going to head west, right? Or some variant of west. Maybe you want to head up from DC up into Maryland and then Pennsylvania. But the reality is once you get up into Pennsylvania, everybody heading west from Philadelphia, everybody heading west from Newark and New York and Boston, etc. Well, Boston would be more heading north than west. But yeah, New York, Philadelphia, everybody's going to radiate away from the cities. So anything that feeds west of DC, for example, out Interstate 66, that's this road right here that runs like this. Anything that feeds out 66 is going to be less than ideal. So instead of going straight this way, it may behoove us to pick a location that's actually this way, right? So instead of dealing with the DC people, it's more of the Richmond people, which is a much smaller location, population center. So there's a lot of areas, either maybe in here, what might be a good spot to consider, even down into here, or even further down in here. You will get some trickle out from Norfolk and Chesapeake, but you have to factor in that those people are going, if everybody can only have one tank of gas, they're not going to get that far west before they run out of gas. Whereas I'm starting much further west, and heading west for me, I can get much further. And go back in here, move that. Okay. So you want to consider where other people are fleeing, and you don't want to pick a location that is well-known or popular. So for us, for example, we wouldn't want to pick somewhere in Shenandoah National Park, because that's going to be like the first place people go around here if they had to bug out, would be to go up into the campgrounds around Shenandoah National Park. So you want to go into less well-known areas, and preferably areas that nobody really ever goes. It's just, maybe it's a wildlife area that it's just kind of remote and nobody goes there, and there's nothing to see, and it's not particularly cool looking. And you'll be able to tell if, when you start to pick the spot and you start to scout it out, when you go on a Saturday, is it full of people there parked to go hiking, for example, or camping? If it's full on the weekends, that means a lot of people know about it. So that might not be an ideal location. Now, if you go on a Saturday and there's nobody there, or maybe only one car there, that's a good sign that the place is maybe not that well known. So you want to focus on those types of places. All right, let me come back to the comments. Utah Mike says, how about a sailboat out to calmer seas? No, if you have access to a boat can be a great bug out tool. You do have to worry about piracy, and you're pretty exposed in a boat, frankly. And so if it gets really, really bad and very much a civil unrest situation, other people on boats will then try to come steal your fuel and turn into water world and all that kind of stuff. So Matt says, I think it needs to be stated that a bug out location is different than a bug out bag. A bug out bag is meant to get you from where you are to a safe location. Yeah. Yep. Not very, very true. Then what else? Okay. of the actual places. So we've kind of got a radius now on the map, right? Well, let me bring the map back up. We've got a radius now of where we could go, but now we want to start picking locations. And there's some things that we want to think about. Things we want to think about when we're looking at picking a location. So one is access to water. You need to have reliable, steady access to water, whether it be a stream, a way to collect rain and store rainwater. Maybe somehow you can build a cistern or a well and just let that fill up, till you're maybe you can't construct anything there because it's a wildlife area, for example. But you want a stream, a pond, something. You need access to water within a short distance, with safe short distance. You want to consider defensibility, meaning that wherever you plan on staying as your primary compound, it needs to be elevated. You want to consider natural barriers, defense points, where the hills are, where the rivers are, cliffs, swamps that people can't cross or are very difficult to cross. Matt mentioned earlier single entry and exit points. That's a good thing to consider. If you're in a situation where you've had to bug out from your primary location, that means times are desperate. And so some would say, well, I want multiple ways of getting out of my place. And yes, you do want an exit strategy from your bug out location to something else at some point, I guess. But being able to defend that spot is probably just as important as being able to bug out from your bug out location, if that were a thing. Plans upon plans upon plans, I guess. You also want resource and sustainability. Factor that in. Is there a place where you could actually plant food? Could you grow crops there? Is there any kind of wildlife or hunting in the area? Is there foraging opportunities for berries, fishing? Is there a place that, maybe you can take some solar panels with you and a solar generator? Is there a place to put that stuff? Could you build a shelter, a little community there? It's hard to say. Christian Mohiga asks, do you have a rainwater catch system? Not currently. I have a saltwater pool, above ground pool at this property. It's a 16,000 gallon. So I have that, which I can use. Obviously, I don't want to drink it, but I can use that for a whole lot of different stuff. And then I can distill that through different means into, distilled water, basically, and filtered and all that other stuff. There's ways to get it drinkable, although it's not ideal, and I get that. But then also we have some lakes nearby and streams, which are fairly close. Good question. All right. Now, so we talked about resource accessibility. Yeah, multiple routes in, out, you want to have an obvious. So when we talk about routes in and out, we want there to only be one obvious route in or out. Because you know the area, you've studied it, you're going to be able to come up with multiple ways of evacing if you had to. But you need to also consider accessibility in all 4 seasons, right? Can you get there when it's, snowy, muddy, etc.? And just keep in mind that the greater the accessibility is not necessarily better, because the more accessible it is, the more likely somebody's going to stumble upon you, right? So more remote, less, routes in and outs, much, much better. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Utah Mike. Yep. You can get cheap distillers that remove salt. It's not crazy difficult to do. You can even jerry rig ways to do it. It's not like you're trying to distill alcohol or something where it has to be like certain quality and temperatures. You just need the water to boil, steam, go up, and then essentially catch the steam. So different stuff like that. And then you also want to, with all of these different things, water accessibility, sustainability, defensibility, you want to consider changes in the seasons and how that might, be better or worse in winter or summer. And so this has to be a livable thing for you, because it's essentially, if you bug out from your primary bug in location, like your home, and you get to one of these things out there and, you pick a spot out in the mountains or in the woods, you're probably going to be there for a long time. So, and then obviously once you have a location in mind, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go there. You're going to want to spend time there. You want to camp there, hike around there as best you can, explore there, consider starting to create stashes and stashing things in different places. Do all this before you've determined that's your bug out location, right? Because we're doing this while we have the internet, while we have cars, why we can go back and forth, why we can just enjoy that area and get to know it well, before it's a life or death situation. Yeah, I need to practice. Yes, Utah Mike, that's a good one. I'll have to definitely invest on that. And if you can do well, yeah, if you have, like, if you're buying property and you can get, well, like an actual pump on your property, that's amazing, right? Both having a solar one or one of the hand ones, having both options are great. So let me show you a couple of things. I just wanted to bring some visual maps up. So, to show you kind of like this gives us, we can do some radius stuff in here and figure out, how far we can get and then what our options are. But in addition to that, let me share a different screen now. So this is a cool little tool I found, and most of your states are going to have something similar to this. But what this is, let's see, this is a map of all the Virginia wildlife management areas, the WMRs. No, wildlife management reserves or something. I can't remember what they're called now. But here you can see them. So fairly close to where we live is the C.W. Phelps. And if you zoom in, you can see some streams, you can see a lake and some streams, et cetera, et cetera. I've actually been here. It's not popular at all. Now, it's still fairly close to the city. Here's Quantico Marine Base, or let's see, Quantico Marine Base would be right here, somewhere around in here. And so it's still very, very close to the urban area. Here's Alexandria, here's Fredericksburg. So it's still fairly close. But I've been to the C.W. Phelps place, and it's very, very, very few people use it. But you can even come over to other places. Now here we start getting into Shenandoah National Park area here. And then here is I believe this is the, is it Washington? Yeah, this is the West Virginia line. And then some of these places here, but you can zoom in, check out the topography. Here's like a nice high spot on this mountain here. But again, no water. So, but there's tools like this where you can actually play around and start looking for resources. So here's a lake that has some pretty high walls around it. And see don't know where the drainage is for it. But yeah, this is a, tool that you can play around with to help try to find a location. Another one that I found that's pretty good, HuntX. There we go, or OnX Hunt, excuse me. Here's another one. You can see this one. Here's Washington, D.C. And on this, I can tell it to go only use government lands, or you can have it use private lands, but I have it using only government lands because, again, I don't want to go onto somebody's private land in a situation like this because it's very good likelihood of getting shot. So again, here's that C.F. Phelps place that I was talking to you about, C.W. Phelps or whatever it's called. But now you can see the actual aerial shot of it, some of the access points to it. But one nice thing about the OnX Hunt is it has all these little tools that you can like draw and do distance things with. So you can figure out, okay, that's 2.7 miles and start doing some measurements. And so it can be pretty useful. Now, the problem with OnX Hunt is it is I'm doing a free subscription right now, but it's like $100 a year for access to different states, and it's not universal. So I think you can do 2 different states and stuff like that. So it's a little tricky. So yeah, but just some tools that you can play around with to help you kind of, figure out where to go. And again, once you've picked the spot, go there, spend time there, check out how busy it is. And if it doesn't meet what you're looking for, again, if it doesn't have good water, if it doesn't have defensibility, high ground, etc., look for another spot, and you can keep looking. Again, for me, I have 200 miles, essentially 200-mile driving distance that I can do. And I have from here to here. And if you take that and just arc it down, if you took literally pinned a string here and just went 200 miles this way, I have all this area that I can work in as potential bug out locations. So gives me some options. All right, let's get in the comments now. Questions? What are your guys' thoughts? Christian says, to Utah Mike, little fan stills are great. Okay, I haven't seen the little fan stills. I'll have to check that out. Matt says, additionally, freshwater ponds are a good source of water you can filter and fish. Yeah. So ponds are great. They act in a way as a defensive barrier as well. People aren't going to likely cross the water. They're going to most likely come from dry ground. Homestead Industry says, consider what's upwind, chemical plants, nuke targets. That's a great point. Now, I would consider the point at which you've bugged out of your home. If there were going to be nukes, they would have already gone off. And so now you've bugged in, you've survived the initial blast wherever you are, you didn't get hit, and you've survived the fallout, and now you've got you've hit, you've started the exposure has dropped to the point you can leave your home, and then say you had to bug out for some reason. Again, I do not advocate bugging out. Bugging out is the last resort. It's the last thing that you want to do. So what I'd recommend is at that point, you do want to consider chemical plants. You want to consider different power plants and all that. Any kind of like chemical exposure stuff is pretty scary. Lunar Minx, welcome, says, if you have a pond, grow some duckweed. It provides a ton of nutrients. So that's actually a great thing. So you can potentially, now you have to look at the laws in your area and state, but if you have a bug out location and you're not going to get in trouble for it, you could plant some of the duckweed at the lake, where you've decided to bug out too. Now, maybe that's not allowed and that would get you in trouble, as long as it's okay. But you could always do some prep stuff at the location, right? So like I said, create caches. Maybe you plant some blackberry bushes and let them just go wild in the woods near that bug out location in the middle of the woods somewhere. And the animals will love it. And then if you ever had to bug out there, you have access to blackberries, for example. So what's funny, Christian Mojica, and Matt talking about fishing, I conceptually know how to fish. I know how to clean a fish, but actually catching a fish is challenging for me. So I would not want to rely on that as a primary food source. Now, in a SHTF situation and I bugged out to a lake, I would figure it out. But I'm just not good at fishing. Homestead Engineering says, a lot of folks have family around the country. Make sure, yes, yeah, you want to communicate your plan within your group. Now, for me, I've got family down in South Carolina, for example. And so if I have a regional situation and I had to leave my home, I'm not going to go to my bug out location in the woods. I'm going to go down to my mom's house in South Carolina, as assuming her, South Carolina isn't impacted by my regional thing up here in DC, or maybe go to my brother's house in Ohio, for example. So I'm really talking about in a true SHTF that's affected the whole country, and you can't just escape one bad area to go to a good area, right? I mean, if the East Coast were highly impacted by this thing, but once you get to the other side of the Mississippi, things are fine. Well, then I would just drive to the other side of the Mississippi, try to figure out a way to get there, and do that. Outskirt Home says most survivalists can't catch a fish. The TV show alone has taught us that. Well, especially if you don't have good equipment. Like if you have like true fishing equipment, fishing is still can be challenging, but it's one thing. But if you're just like trying to catch fish in a primitive way, it's actually really hard. Matt says fish are dumb. You don't really need a skill set, just time. You can cast drag nets. And that's the other part too, is that in a survival situation, you're no longer constrained by, the regular fishing laws, and you can use nets and you can use traps and you can use all these other things that are, our ancestors would use to catch fish that are considered not sporting, I guess, in society. So something else to think about. All right. Well, I think we've covered it. I'm not sure we're going to go the full time tonight. Outskirt Home says, I'll teach you how to fish. Well, I've been fishing for years and I enjoy it. I've caught fish before. I actually caught a really nice bass a couple, what was it? Probably 7-8 years ago up near Front Royal on the, what river was that? Oh my gosh. What is the river called? Feeds into the Potomac. The Shenandoah River. Yeah, it was a bass in the Shenandoah River. And it was a really nice one. It was like probably a 14 inches or so. Biggest bass I've ever caught. So I can catch a fish. I'm just not good at it. But appreciate the offer. True. Anyway, I appreciate you all being on the live stream. Hopefully you found this helpful in trying to pick a bug out location. Again, this is something I highly encourage you to do. Think about if you had to leave your home, do you have somewhere to go? Can you go to a family member's house? Is it far enough away? Do they expect you to come? Have the conversations with them. Ask permission if you can store some stuff at their house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But do it now as opposed to later. And then communicate your plans and to your family members and friends. Anyway, hopefully it helped you. Love y'all. We'll see you next time. Videos coming.